All right, hi everybody. It has been a while since I've done a video. I apologize for that. I really wanted to stay on the ball with it, but summer came and it's just been crazy and life happens. I figured I'd reintroduce myself for some of you. If this is the first video that you're gonna watch, I actually recommend not, not watching it and go back and watch the first video of the series and at least watch Reptilian Brain and Repressed Emotions, because some of the stuff I hit on today, I'm addressing those concepts without really going deeply into them. So you could watch today, but if you're going, wait a minute, what is she talking about with those concepts? Go back and rewatch the first couple, and then they'll kind of key you into everything else. So my name is Amy Semas-Day, and I am a licensed marriage family therapist. I've been working in the field, helping people heal essentially since I was 20. So for like 25 years, actually, I've been in the field, working on healing myself, helping other people heal themselves. I've gotten to the point in my career where, I have a thriving private practice, and I'm working with so many folks. I have a wait list. But I just figured I wanted to get the information out there. And a lot of this stuff I think is kind of groundbreaking, and I really think that we should be taught in school all of the things that I'm kind of hitting on, just because I think it's basic. It's like an owner's manual for ourselves, and we should be taught it in the 5th grade, without a doubt. And it's almost not fair that we're not, and that's my one beef with school curriculum. I absolutely think this needs to be in there because I think it would change everything. I think the world would be different if we knew how to manage our emotions, if we knew how to relate with other people, if we knew how to manage conflict. We would be happier, more fulfilled, more connected human beings with healthier relationships. But the name of the game is healing, and the name of the game is growing and learning and getting better. And so that's what these videos are, is hopefully helping folks to meet those goals, right? Which I really think are our human goals deep down. So today I wanted to talk a little bit more about relationships. I know my last video I talked about relationships, conflict in relationships, how we manage triggers. And there were so many things that I left out, obviously in the interest of time. I don't want to make the video like 50 minutes. So this is kind of like a part B to the first part on relationships. So there was a couple more things I wanted to key into. So kind of just to reiterate, we talked a little bit about how in relationships, it's most of the time, actually, I think all of the time, and like I said before, the more attracted you are to your partner. So in relationship, in this instance, I'm actually talking about romantic relationships. And they say that the more attracted we are to our partner, the more likely they're going to bring up our stuff, right? So when we go through trauma and we go through difficulties in life, we develop neural pathways that get pretty solidified. I kind of look at it like scar tissue, and that scar tissue becomes the nature of our triggers later on. So if you're in a relationship with somebody and all of a sudden they say something and you go 0 to 60, more than likely it hit a trigger, right? So the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit more about was, how do you know it's a trigger? How do you know it's not a justifiable reaction to something that somebody just said that maybe was really hurtful or really inappropriate? Okay, so I had a supervisor say this to me years ago, and it always rang true. He said, a trigger is essentially an emotional reaction that you have to something that's way out of proportion to whatever that stimulus is. So if somebody comes in and goes, oh, Amy, gosh, you're looking a little tired today, and I kind of flip out because that's bringing up my, oh, I'm not good enough, or man, I had a boyfriend that did this and this. It's likely not going to be in the moment, right? So again, most triggers are a large percentage of past, a small percentage of present, okay? So the way that you key into it is knowing that, wow, this is a really intense emotional reaction that likely is not rooted in what's just happening right now or what this person just said to me. So that's one way that you can kind of key into, okay, this is a trigger. And this trigger, again, is bringing up emotional material, okay? So another way that you can tell is asking yourself, what does this remind me of? That's probably one of the biggest things I do with clients when they come in. They'll say, me and my boyfriend got into a big fight, or me and my partner got into a big fight, and I'll say, okay, tell me a little bit about what was going on. Well, he did this and this and this. And then I'll say, what does that remind you of? What does that bring up for you? One of the biggest things I love to do with couples is I literally will put on the board, what their specific triggers are. And sometimes we have to explore past arguments and conflict in order to get to them. And then once we find the trigger, I like to go right into, okay, so what does this remind you of? At what point in your life did you feel that? And inevitably it's, 10 years ago, when my dad did this, this, and this, or, my first boyfriend did this, this, and this, right? So then that's something that keys us into, okay, so this is something that you need to heal. So a reminder again, in the first video, I talked a little bit, or actually quite a bit, about how, relationships are kind of, holy ground in some ways, because they bring up all of this emotional material, and then it's incumbent upon us to go, okay, this is my stuff. Let me go process this. Let me go journal about it. Let me go cry my eyes out in order to get that emotional energy out. Because again, this keys back to my second video on repressed emotions. And, if we had a really strong, or if we had a really difficult, maybe we had a traumatic experience in a relationship in our past, there's no way you're going to process all of those emotions. So don't feel bad, or like you're damaged, or there's something wrong with you. If you have a lot of triggers, it just means that you've experienced life. And for those of us that are on the planet for a while, you don't get out of here unscathed. So things are going to bring up, things that are traumatic are naturally going to activate a lot of emotion that you're not going to be able to process in the moment. So I go back to that over and over again. Of course you didn't process it. It was too big, right? Whatever that was, if it was traumatic, there's no way that you can process a traumatic experience all at once. It would be impossible, right? So what we do is we store it, we repress it in order to adapt, in order to move on, and then we have to go back in there and we have to start taking little bits and pieces and processing. I don't think I said it in my original video, but in quantum physics, they talk a little bit about how, emotions are energy, right? So emotion is energy in motion, and abiding actually by the first law in normal physics, like Newtonian physics, embedded in the law, it says that energy is never lost, it's only transferred. So once energy is, it is. So if you don't get that emotional energy out, it stays in there, okay? And, unfortunately, I think a lot of people in our society and a lot of people are taught, have a stiff upper lip, don't show your emotion. If you cry or show an emotion, you're weak. So we're taught to kind of store and repress, and we wrongly think that, okay, it's gone because I'm not thinking about it. Wow, I haven't thought about that for a good couple months. It must be gone. Unfortunately, it's not true. It's still in there. And the way that is that, obviously it's going to come out in relationships and triggers, Every once in a while I meet somebody that maybe not, right? Maybe they'll be like, yeah, I don't have a lot of triggers, but that's kind of, and then they tell me that they have some trauma and I go, there's something else that might be going on there. But actually we're going to talk about that in a moment, how people's brains are wired a little bit differently. And some people actually can store repressed energy a lot better or a lot easier and almost a lot more successfully than other people, which is kind of good news, bad news in some ways, because I think it will come back to bite you, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So anyways, going back to it, so the good news is that relationships will bring it out. You will learn what your repressed emotions are, and then the goal, since all of a sudden those emotions are up and they're to the surface and they're not filed away deep down in the crevices of your psyche or your body, since they're up, you actually get to process them, and then you get to lighten the load. So this is the coolest part for me, and even still to this day, obviously I'm human, and I've had a lot of trauma. I have a lot of moments that happen where all of a sudden, actually it just happened this year, I had something really minor, silly, that really brought up a very, very painful repressed memory, and emotions around the memory from years ago. I think I was 18 when it happened. And for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why this incident was really bothering me. I couldn't just get past it. It's like it kept ruminating in my mind, and it was absolutely triggering an emotional reaction. It wasn't until I sat down and really said, okay, done. I have to do something about this. And I really started to process the emotion and really started to follow it to its root. And once I followed it to its root, I kind of cried my eyes out for a couple of days, actually, and it's been ongoing. I'm still kind of processing it. But what I found is I've become lighter, which is really crazy. And that trigger that used to be really, really active in, that it would get triggered by this certain scenario that kind of keeps showing up in my life is lessening. So that's how you're healing, is because that activation isn't as strong. And so some people will think, oh gosh, I'm never going to be healed. I'm still getting activated when this happens. No, you'll notice that it starts to soften if you're really doing that deeper work. So another question that I've been asked numerous times, and I know I hit on this, I think I hit on it in my repressed emotions video, but how do you heal it, right? So people are like, okay, so this is great. I know I have repressed energy and I know I have triggers. How do I get in there? Like I said before, journaling's a great way. Another technique that I have discovered recently and have done with myself and have recommended it with my clients is something I call video journaling. And it literally is like this. You put up your iPhone or whatever and you hit play and you tell the story of your trauma. And as you tell the story, you're going to remember things and it's going to bring you back to that time and it's automatically going to bring up emotion. And then once you do it, I want you to rewatch it. And for me, when I did this, it was really powerful because not only was I speaking it the first time I did it, but when I rewatched it, I saw things and I felt things and I had a different level of understanding and almost empathy for myself because I was able to step outside and see it and hear myself, that it was really powerful. So, in a lot of the, there's one form, a technique that's used, it's called trauma-focused CBT, and a big piece of that is telling your story. So that's a way. Now, and I always say this as my disclaimer, if you have really intense trauma, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, make sure that you have obviously a therapist that you're doing this work with. You don't want to be flooded without coping skills. Like in trauma-focused CBT, a big piece of it is getting coping skills kind of established before we go in and you do a narration of your story. So, but if you feel like you've done work in the past and you've already worked with a therapist and you have good coping skills and you're just wanting to maybe heal another layer, absolutely feel free. It's a really good technique. I recommend it highly. So what you'll notice though too is that, in relationship with your partner, these triggers will start to lessen if you unplug from the relationship and focus on yourself. And I know I hit on this last time, but we all the time make the mistake of thinking that your partner's the one doing this, right? It's their fault that you're feeling this way or this. And if it's a trigger and it's inside of you, more than likely it's your own. Now, again, that's the difference between a trigger and what's happening right now. In a little bit, I'm going to talk about toxic relationships. And guess what? It's not okay for people to treat you bad, okay? It's not okay for people to have no boundaries and no accountability. That's not good. So that's not your fault per se. But if it is bringing up a strong emotional reaction in you, there might be a piece there that you need to heal. So again, it's all opportunities. So as much as I go, oh gosh, here we go, something else, another trigger. Or, like this year, I really kind of got thrown for a loop for a second. And I'm like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? It was such a blessing because it was like, oh gosh, there's another layer I heal, another way to get lighter, and another way to be more connected to myself. Because again, the more muck you have in there, the more disconnected you are to yourself, your purpose, your spirit, God, the universe, whatever, right? So the more we heal, the more we key into kind of, who we are, and that who we are connects to something bigger than ourselves. And then I always tell people, and then you get to help other people. More than likely, and it's just the way it works, other people will come to you with the same problems later on, and you'll be able to help. You'll be able to give them insight. And that's what makes it so beautiful. The whole process of healing, that's what makes it so worth it. So that's the first thing I wanted to key on a little bit, was talking a little bit more about triggers, a little bit more about where they come from, a little bit more about different ways that you can go about healing them. Another piece I wanted to hit on, and I had, I think, a little comment on my last video, was wanting to go more into the pursuer-distancer dynamic that inevitably happens with couples. So what this is that, when one of us gets triggered or both of us gets triggered, it's usually both of us at that point. So let's say, something happens and your partner says something and it activates you and you get triggered and you say something and you get defensive because, again, you're in your reptilian brain and your partner all of a sudden becomes your enemy. And if you make the mistake of engaging with them and projecting it onto them and into the relationship, they're going to get defensive. So, and so you're doing that, and then all of a sudden they get defensive, and now they personalized it, and now they're in reptilian brain. Okay, so once both partners are in reptilian brain, there is only one answer, and that is a timeout. Okay, at least for a little bit. Now, I'm not an advocate of avoidance, and I'm not an advocate of stonewalling. Absolutely, you're going to need to come back and process, but there's nothing good that will be had when you're in reptilian brain and you're not using your higher brain. You're in a part of the brain that's designed to act, not think. So not the time for conflict resolution right at that moment. Now, the problem with this is that there's going to be more than likely one of you that's going to have a hard time with that. And for the most part, in most couples, okay, same with me, in every relationship I've been in, I play one role and the other person plays the other role. It's very unusual. Actually, I think I had one relationship where I was the distancer and they were too, and it didn't work out. We just never came back, which is classic, because maybe that's why that doesn't work. It's actually funny. Anyways, but in most relationships, one's the pursuer and one's the distancer. And again, like I talked about before, the pursuer is the one that has massive anxiety about separating and taking a time out, and they want to work it out right now. Because if they feel like if that doesn't get worked out right now, it never will, or something bad's going to happen, or the person's going to reject them and leave, etc. It essentially brings up abandonment issues. So if you have anything around that and separating brings up anxiety, more than likely it's hitting on your abandonment issues. And by the way, as human beings, we all have abandonment. We all have fear of abandonment, and we all have fear of engulfment. Okay, so both of those are kind of present for all of us on some level. For the pursuer, the fear of abandonment is greater. For the distancer, it's actually the fear of engulfment. So the distancer there's this fear that they're going to be, that they can't breathe and they feel suffocated and they're going to explode. So as the distancer says, oh my gosh, I can't talk to you anymore, I need a time out, and they start pulling away, and inevitably the pursuer's like, oh my God, no, you're going to talk to me and you're not going to run away. And they're trying to pull them back in. And the more they pull them back in, the more the distancer distances, and the more the distancer distances, the more that really activates the pursuer's anxiety around separation. And then the more the pursuer is pursuing, the more the distancer has their fear of engulfment. So you could see how this would totally result in a massive explosion and a breakdown in the relationship if people stay engaged. So the only thing that can happen, and the sooner you do it, the better, is I need a timeout, and I love you, and let's talk about this tomorrow. So like I said before, it really is incumbent upon the distancer, because they're more okay with the separation and that's what they want at that time. And that's going to bring relief. It is really important for you to go, you know what, Sally, we need a timeout. Let's talk about this in a couple of hours when we're both in our higher brain. Now, for the pursuer, that's the moment that you're going to have to be like, oh God, here we go. Let me figure out what my coping skills are. And I really think that write it in your phone, or write a list of what your coping strategies are and put it in your pocket. You might think, oh, why would I forget? It's the things that make me feel better. We'll forget in that moment, because again, you're in a tiny part of your brain that does not have access to problem solving, big picture thinking, assessing consequences, perspective. All of that's shut off. So this part of the brain is only designed to act in panic. It is absolutely fear-based. It feels like it's gonna die, and so it's kill or be killed. That's the mentality of this part of the brain. So it is really hard to interrupt it, to even go, oh, let me pull out my piece of paper to see a coping skill. You're already going in higher brain. So me saying that like it's an easy thing, it's not. It definitely is. It's a challenge, and it's something that you have to train yourself in doing. But if you can do it one time, guess what? You just loosen that neural pathway hold of amygdala reptilian brain response and created a new pathway of amygdala higher brain. Because really the goal, like I said before, I think, and the most Zen people, by the way, Forrest Gump, right? If he was a real person, his amygdala is totally hooks to his higher brain. It does not hook to his reptilian brain. He doesn't freak out. He doesn't get activated. There's some people that I know that are kind of like that, and I think that they're just, we'll talk about this in a second because everybody's brain's different, but there's some people that have a better time going to higher brain. There's also some people that disconnect, which isn't the same thing. But anyhow, so the goal is to just start to try to interrupt it, even if you could do it one time, right? Interrupt it once, and then you can start to create a new behavior. It's very difficult, right? But you can do it with practice and awareness, and that's what these videos are really about, is just to kind of key us in and to remind us, okay, this is the way that we do it. So if you can do a timeout in that moment, and again, for the pursuer, it's going to be more challenging, so don't be hard on yourself. But if you can go, oh, that's right, funny movie, let me go for a walk, let me go do some breathing exercises, let me meditate, let me, something that's going to kind of get you into your higher brain in that moment. It might even be a distraction. Let me go watch Netflix really quick. I really think that trying to do something that's a little bit more peaceful versus like a video game, because that stuff's so distracting and it kind of disconnects us more. Something that is going to kind of connect you more is going to be, I think, better. And I'm going to have another video that goes a little bit into internal anchors versus external distractions and why we want more internal anchors in our life. But anyhow, so that is something that I really wanted to talk a little bit more about, the pursuer-distancer dynamic. And then for the distancer, it's really important probably for you to come back and kind of, try to de-escalate as much as you can, and then come back and have a conversation about it. And hopefully by then, I mean, I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I'm starting to feel better, I almost go, oh gosh, why was I so upset? I almost forget because I'm not in that low brain anymore. And cognitive dissonance says that we're going to remember times in our life that support our current state of consciousness. So if you're in a lower brain, you remember all the times that you were in lower brain. And actually you feel like you've always been in lower brain, right? So that's that's kind of where that comes from. But likewise, when we're in a positive place, we almost go, oh yeah, I'm fine. I have so many clients that will come in 1 week, it's the end of the world, and they're panicked and they don't know what to do, and then the following week everything's fine and they don't need to come anymore. And that's and that's predictable, like, okay, well, that's cool. I think the good thing is when you go from low to high, or you go from high to low to high, you remember, okay, next time I go low, I won't be there forever. So knowing that you'll move through it, and knowing that if you allow the emotion to come and process, it will move. So again, that goes back a little bit to the repressed emotion video. So when you take that time out, using coping skills to soothe, or of course, like I said before, you could also process during that time. And processing is trying to key into, what is this triggering? Let me cry, let me get deeper into the emotion. And what's really cool about that, again, it unplugs you from the relationship, because that emotion really wasn't so much about this relationship, more than likely, and it was more about past stuff. Okay, so that's what I want to say about that. Another thing I want to hit on, and this is, I think, really interesting. There's a difference in gender when it comes to how we manage, being activated. Okay, so what does that mean? Now, really quick, this is also my disclaimer. Every person, whatever your anatomy is, right? So if you're male and your anatomy is male, more than likely you'll probably have a male brain. We're going to talk about the difference between the female and male brain. And if you're a female, more than likely you'll probably have a female brain. Now, this is not always the case, right? Regardless of what you identify, it could go one way or another. I have females that have way more of a male brain in terms of how it shows up and how they process, and I have men who have way more female brain. So when I say male, female, I'm really talking about the traits, and I'm really talking about the behaviors that show up. It's not necessarily tied to your anatomy, okay? But it is tied to your neural anatomy, okay? So somebody with a male brain, da-da-da. Anyway, so let's go into it. So this is the deal, and I see this all the time with couples. Like, I'll have the female come in, and or at least the person that has more of the female brain, and she's sitting next to the person that has more of the male brain, and she says, well, all I wanted to do last night was talk about my feelings, and all Johnny wanted to do, or whatever partner's name is, all they wanted to do was solve it. And they didn't want to talk about it, and change the subject, and blah, 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 blah. And then it results in a huge blow up, because for her, she feels invalidated and not seen, etc. So I'm going to actually just go with the pronouns, so just follow me, but you could switch it around however it works. So this is the deal. So for the most part, a woman, when we are experiencing stress and anxiety, studies show that by talking about it, our cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone, go down, right? And then we have the positive neurotransmitters go up. So talking about it and processing it and getting validation, all that, so good. We need it, we rely on it, and that really keys in back into my, repressed emotions, that being heard, seen, and validated. That's what an emotion wants, right? And for a woman, that's very, very true. Okay, so for a man, it's the opposite. They find that a man, when he's talking about problems or an emotion or something that he can't solve, his cortisol goes up. So processing and validating is more difficult. So if they're sitting with their partner and their partner's telling them their problem, they automatically want to go in and solve it, right? Because that makes them feel better to solve it. That's exactly what a woman doesn't want, though, because then they don't feel heard or seen or validated. So you can see how it's a total setup. I mean, it's kind of a joke that we're even paired together, because we're so different in terms of what we're needing and how we process things. Another thing is, I think a lot of men feel like their job, and again, the male brain feels like their job is to is to solve it or to make their partner happy. I've heard that so many times. I just want her to be happy. And I always go, that's not the goal. It's authenticity. But so they key in as soon as, the female brain person is wanting to process and has conflict, they right away go, uh-oh, I better solve this because they're not happy. And my job is to make them happy and I'm failing. So it's so funny how that shows up. And, the woman will be so mad that they don't hear and see and validate. And then the man is just feeling so crappy about himself because they're failing, because their female counterpart is not happy. So they're both kind of feeling less than with each other. So I usually try to help my male-brained clients to go, when your female brain counterpart starts to kind of talk about things, and I really like her to even say, hey, I just need you to hear and validate me, so he knows. It's really helpful because then he can go, oh, let me turn my brain off that wants to logic and let me go right into just hearing her and validating her. Like, God, honey, I hear that was really rough and that was probably a really yucky experience. I'm so sorry you went through that. I hear that you're really sad. It makes sense why you're sad. I'm so sorry to hear that that's what you're experiencing. And, if you do this, the female counterpart will go, truly, that's like almost, that's why women will be on the phone with each other or the female brain women, right? Will be on the phone with each other, processing and chewing. And the guys, they're the male brain guy or whatever is going, what is going on? Why do they need to do that for 5 hours? It makes the female brain girl feel better. Okay. So that's the first thing to understand the difference in genders. So if you're female brain woman, know that that's not how they process. So it's not that they don't love you or that they don't hear and that they don't care about you. It's just that they go right to problem solving because that's how they deal with emotions. The next thing is, and I heard this recently and it really struck me, that, studies show that in some ways men don't process emotion. Now this is really interesting, but essentially, there's a band of nerves that connects the right and left hemisphere, and it's known as the corpus callosum, right? The corpus callosum in men is actually very, very small. And the reason why, and again, this is, when I say in men, I mean the male brain, but so this enables them to be really good at serial task, one thing at a time, right? So they can have a bazillion things. Just maybe their wife just yelled at him and they just found out that their grandma's sick and they just found this and that out. And then all of a sudden they've got a ball game on. They sit down for the ball game and everything's fine. Okay. All that other stuff is gone. So the way I look at it is they have file cabinets in their brain that they can file it away and lock it and it's shut and it's out of their awareness legitimately. Okay. Which is fascinating because if you have a female brain, that does not happen. So if you go ask if you go ask your counterpart something and then 5 hours later you go, oh my gosh, he didn't do it, he doesn't love me. No, it's just because it's in his file cabinet. Okay, and that's also why you guys are going to handle things differently. So female brain is the opposite. Big band of corpus callosum, right? The corpus callosum is very big, so it's a big band of nerves, and you have a lot of cross processing. So what that means is we have pop-up windows that don't go away, and they won't go away until they're completed, and you can kind of click close. So they're here all the time. We got like a zillion things in our mind all the time, and we can't ignore them. So unlike the male counterpart to us, they've got file cabinets neatly stacked away. So that's why women want to process emotion and we want to do it now, because we can't ignore that they're there. So we're built differently. So knowing that is really important. And also knowing, and I have a lot of female brain clients that they've done more healing than their male counterpart, and that frustrates them. Well, it's because your brain is endowed with the ability to process emotion, right? Whereas the male counterpart, not so much. Now, again, this is where it differs. I have some men, and that's their anatomy and their identity, that they totally have a female brain and they process emotion very quickly and right away, and it's like they have a pop-up window, and I bet you their brains are more female. And then I have some females, like I have one that she doesn't process anything and she's like, nope, I'm fine, and it's filed away, and she doesn't really even get triggered, which is fascinating. So the myth that women are crazy, no, we're not crazy. We just have pop-up windows. We just can't ignore things. So it's got that women are crazy and the men are detached or whatever. There's truth to it, and it's the way that it's our neuroanatomy. So if you're a woman, know that, in a lot of ways we have a massive advantage because we get to know things and process things and understand ourselves and know our triggers, and we know where everything comes from. And a man, it's a little bit more difficult because it's filed away. I think eventually, though, that's going to end up being a problem, and I bet you, that might even be tied to more heart disease in men and whatnot, just because of not being able to process emotion. I also think the added piece that guys, there's the cultural belief that you're not supposed to process emotion, at a young age, although I'm seeing that change quite a bit, like with my clients bringing their male, their boys in, being so much more emotionally aware and having more emotional education in the house at young age, which is so cool. So they know that they can feel and it's okay to process. So healthy, because I do think it's going to be more difficult if you have a male brain, and essentially because it's easier to file it away. So that's why it's different. So again, if you're a man and she's upset, if you just zip it for a second, don't talk, and go, oh my gosh, I hear you. Or if you're going to talk, just give the feedback. Hear, see, validate. And I go into that. That's a whole nother thing. But emotion wants to be heard, seen, and validated always. You can't apply logic to emotion. They're two different languages you're speaking. So, if you validate and hear the emotion, they're more than likely going to be able to come up to the logic place after that, after it gets seen and heard and validated. And I always talk about my poor little daughter. She's like my guinea pig, but I do that with her. And if I apply logic or problem solving too early, where she's needing validation instead, she's not going to hear it. So, and she definitely has more of a female brain. Okay, that's that piece that I definitely wanted to hit on a little bit, because I think the gender piece is really interesting. And again, male-female brain. All right, so the next thing I wanted to talk about that I didn't hit on last time, and this is just going to be really brief, but I talked a lot about it in the last relationship that, every relationship is going to bring up your stuff more than likely. It's going to be unusual if it doesn't. I mean, maybe if you don't have any triggers in the realm of romantic relationships, maybe it won't, but I think most of us have something, especially. And if whatever sex your partner is, it'll probably bring up the relationship you had with that sex parent, whether if you're a girl with a girl, your relationship with your mom, if you're a girl with a guy, your relationship with your dad, right? So, and vice versa. More than likely it's going to bring up that stuff, whatever that relationship was like. Now, it might be true that, again, your romantic relationships might be pretty solid, and you might have issues with peers or maybe, bosses or whatever, and that's fine. So this might not totally apply, but you could apply everything that I'm saying to those other types of relationships. It doesn't have to just be romantic. But I did want to hit a little bit on, sometimes if we're in a relationship and we are working on ourselves and we are really taking, accountability and looking at our triggers and trying to figure out where our triggers come from and healing, and our partner is absolutely not doing that, and they tend to blame you and they tend to never take accountability, you might be in a relationship with somebody that's a little bit toxic. So, I kind of alluded to, hey, you could make it work out with anybody in my last video, and that's very rose-colored glasses, and that's not true. I mean, my thing is if it's like when I have a couple that comes in here and they'll say, Amy, do you think that we can work through it? I go, if you want to make it work and both of you guys are willing to look at yourself and take accountability, 100%, you can absolutely make anything work, without a doubt. Unless there's addiction or infidelity or something else happening, that's like a relationship exit. But if you're both invested and you're focused and you're wanting to at least work through it and take accountability, 100%. But if you're with somebody that maybe is a little narcissistic, and I think I'm gonna do a video on narcissism because gosh, there needs to be, and there's I'm so glad there's so much more information out there. Like 10 years ago, there's nothing. But I've had the pleasure of knowing quite a few. If you're in a relationship with one, it's going to be a lot more difficult because they're not going to be taking ownership at all, and they're going to be blaming you, and your self-esteem is likely going to suffer, and you'll likely feel this big in relationship with them that, in those types of situations, it might be best to get out, right? So assessing kind of the health of relationship is really, really important. And I've had numerous clients come in where that's happened, where there's, been, one of them was really wanting to work on themselves in the relationship, and the other one was pretty abusive. And, luckily through the work and awareness, one of them, they ended up, getting out of the relationship. And I'm a firm believer that we all attract what we attract for a reason. So you got to look at, okay, what am I doing in a relationship with somebody that's not willing to own anything? There's healing there for sure. So, and I hate labeling and diagnosing because I don't think that's useful, but I do think it's really important to put boundaries and to name abusive behavior, because that's not healthy. If we don't, then we continue to enable it. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And like I said, I'm going to go more into, I think I want to do a video on narcissism. We'll see. I don't know if that will be the next video or not. I'm absolutely going to do another video talking about anchors, internal anchors versus external anchors, and a lot of times how external anchors become addictions. And they're like addictions that have gone wrong, but that will be more that will come later. So hopefully this is helpful. I know it was a little bit everywhere, but I just wanted to hit on some key points that I wasn't able to put into the video last time, just in the interest of time. So that's it for now. Thanks you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.